the way we designed the sessions, as I mentioned yesterday, is really taking into account the entire life cycle of the book. And so this first one is just going to get us a nice overview and how to look at it kind of from that 30,000-foot view and put it all together, and then the rest of the day we'll go kind of bit by bit down that value chain. So for this first panel, we have, and I even have these great pictures that I stole off LinkedIn, guys. So there we go. We have Brad Sharp with Bookmasters, Mike Collinge from Marquis Book Printing, and Kathleen Lewis from Publishers Graphics. I'm going to let each of you kind of introduce yourself and your company, what your primary focus is as printers. So Brad, go ahead.
I'm Brad Sharp with Baker & Taylor Publisher Services Bookmasters. We're a book manufacturer focusing on offset, short-run digital, and print-to-order, located in Ashland, Ohio. That's our focus.
Okay. Hi, I'm Kathleen Lewis, and I'm the Vice President and co-founder of Publishers Graphics. We started in 1996 as a short-run digital book manufacturer, and in 2009 started doing print-on-demand for the Book of One. We have two facilities, one's in Chicago, the other's in St. Louis, and we have a total combined square footage of about 60,000 square feet.
Morning, I'm Mike Collinge. I'm the Exec Vice President at Marquis Book Printing. Our company is a full-service book manufacturer serving publishers throughout North America and Europe. We have 600 team members who work in 3 plants in outside of Toronto, Montreal, and Quebec City, and we export about 40% of our business back into the United States and have been a proud BMI member for over 25 years, and really excited to see this event today.
Thank you all. So, Duff, if we can flip, perfect. Here's the full picture that I only showed you part of yesterday. But when we're talking about life cycle of a book and kind of how all the various pieces fit together, what do you feel are the key decisions that really affect the life of the book? And I want to start with Kathleen. I think you and I were talking about this before, and you said just the desired overall quality of the book is you feel is one of the best starting spots, right?
Yes, I think when you choose or try to make a decision about how you're going to start or go about printing a book, you have to first look at the print quality. I think also the paper and your distribution channels kind of all have to come together to enable you to use a certain print form.
Okay. Brad, what do you think?
I think that's very true. I think that design element, but I think also how do you support that long tail for the life cycle of that book as well. So how do you look at that book and say, is this applicable for short-run digital, for print-to-order, just to support it as it lives out its life cycle? So how can that design help contribute to those factors?
Okay. Mike?
The graphic looks pretty confusing, which is probably representative of our industry in many ways. So I think out of the publishers here, how many people work in manufacturing production departments? And out of that group, how many of you look at a title and do a sort of profit and loss review and go through everything it says there from the author's rights right through production and distribution? So for us as book manufacturers, we have one component out of that life cycle or that supply chain, and there's many other things that we can actually impact depending on the technologies that we use, from print on demand and short run offset and longer run production, that we'd really like to explain how you can align those to best get the lowest total cost out of your production process when you consider it within the whole life cycle of a book. So I think that's what we're going to build on here.
Okay. So let's throw out a couple scenarios, right? So if you've got, we'll start with what I'm calling the complete unknown, right? You have a book, you absolutely have no idea what it's going to do. It could sell 100, it could sell 1,000, it could do whatever. Of the things that you just mentioned, you mentioned offset, short-run digital, trying to put all that together. When you're thinking about all of those things, time, costs, the inventory, managing the inventory across all the different channels. If you're a publisher, what are the questions they should be asking you all about how to best go about producing that type of book? Anybody want to take the first stab at that one?
Well, I think as a print provider, we can guide you into the selections of papers, workflows, that if you don't know how many you're going to sell, then I would think an obvious selection would be short run or print on demand. So in making that first choice, then you have to choose from whichever print provider you're going to use, but looking at their different offerings of paper, trim sizes, print quality, then you can make a good decision about how to launch that book. If you're unsure, that's the best way, I think, to start with a title.
Yeah, I think also talking to your print provider and understanding, do they have the capabilities to support that title through its life cycle? Are they able to do short-run digital print on demand, or are they kind of pocketed into one of those manufacturing methods that gives them a little less flexibility to support that through its life cycle? Making sure that they can start with a print on demand or a print to order of 1 copy or 100 copies short-run digital, but then should that title hit and gain some traction, are they able to move that over to offset to lower the manufacturing cost for you through its life cycle?
I think as Brad mentions, there's a wide range of production technologies that can fit, and certainly some of the presenters yesterday or today represent some of the newest and the best technologies that allow publishers to do things weren't possible when I was as young as many of the people in the room today, when we used to have film and files, and yet once you had it at a printer, you were pretty much stuck, or you didn't want to move that stuff because it got so complex. With the portability of digital files and the ability to plug into different channels, whether they be established channels that go into online distribution or into warehouses, publishers have a lot more flexibility and can be really creative in either finding full-service manufacturers that can go from a POD level for an end-of-life book through to a frontless book that might sell thousands or big surprise, and really leveraging that as opposed to being stuck in one production mode that says, well, I can't really print less than 500 books efficiently when you only need 200 or you only need 22. There's so much new technology and solutions available certainly within the BMI membership, but in North America, there's so many technologies that can help a publisher launch a book effectively without having to take a second mortgage or fill their garage with extra books, or a publisher with really great assets that have very declining demand, but can still sell and create revenues for that publisher. The technologies that are available from book manufacturers these days really allow you to be that creative and partner with a number of different companies. And sometimes it's not only one company that can be your solution, to be frank. Many companies specialize in very narrow range verticals of quantities or product formats and things like that. So coming to events like this or going to the BMI website and finding those right partners is a really important thing for production teams to do these days, I think.
I agree.
So, Mike, you mentioned stacking a bunch of books in your garage, if as need be, because you've got inventory. We talked about quality being a good starting point. Do you need to really look at your sales and delivery channels as a starting point sometimes, especially if it's either, the POD digital version, get it one at a time, shipping out makes a lot of sense, but from a cost perspective, if we talk about one of these other scenarios, that you have a known commodity, a book that regularly sells this amount, do you now flip the script to look at your inventory and delivery channels as a starting point, or is it still looking at quality and paper and binding and everything else? What do you think?
I think,
Anybody?
Brad, you were touching on that.
Yeah, I think that's important to look at. Certain manufacturing methods may not be able to achieve certain sales channels, SLAs, or turnaround time. So that's an important thing to look at. If it is a known commodity, how do you look at that and say, do we have a gap protection program for this? Do we have a micro inventory program for this? And and how do we work with the printer to do that, or how do we work with our fulfillment house to do that, and make sure that the printer and the fulfillment are in line with the inventory to make sure that we're supporting the sales channels, not getting chargebacks by being delayed. Some SLA turnarounds are a little bit longer than the expected delivery time for online retailers. So how do you manage that and make sure that you're not missing sales, but holding enough inventory and not too much inventory? So I think that's very important to look at.
Kathleen?
Well, I think that a lot of our publishing partners use multiple print partners so that they don't get in a situation where they don't have inventory. And it allows them to have consistent quality paper, turn times, and get their product to market quicker without having to invest in a lot of inventory for that one particular title, so that you're able to do many more than just a few.
And I think one of the things that's changed in the industry, especially with the demands from the online retailers and the online channels, is it's much harder now to look. Our business as book manufacturers doesn't necessarily revolve just on projects and title by title. I know many of our companies will look and work with a publisher and look at your publishing list or look at a series or product line. And in our case, and I think with other book manufacturers, we encourage our production contacts to sit down with us and go through the product history. So we have business analysts that'll take a look at the product history and monthly sales, month-end inventories, to try to understand average turns and the costs that are involved, not just in print or production. It's certainly your job to make sure that you get a really efficient print production cost, which is a big line on that profit and loss statement. But when you look at all the other costs that go into the product that can affect the final total cost of a book sold, I know with our teams, we'll try to encourage our publishers to look at not the unit cost or the cost of a book that they purchase, but the cost of a book that they end up selling in the end, so that the costs of obsolescence, warehousing, distribution, and all the other things that go into really looking at total costs are considered. Because what we've seen over the years is many publishers, because as Matt's model says, you might sell a few hundred, you might sell a few thousand, and hopefully you sell 10,000s. Many publishers work their profit and loss statements to figure out, I have to sell this many to make profit on the book, as opposed to saying, I'm confident I either have back orders or I have a confidence in the market, I'm going to sell this many. But then the profit and loss statement doesn't work out, so that's either a go forward or no go, and then they just start moving the top line. Say, well, I'm going to sell not 3,000, I'm going to sell 5,000. Oh, look, magically now I'm making money on it. But when the auditors or the accountants at least come back and do the assessment, it doesn't always work out that way. So what we would encourage, and many manufacturers do differently now than 20 years ago when I was in this business, is we look at a publisher's list and go through and really try to come up with a recommendation of the most economic order quantity, try to help them and understand the real costs of a book sold. So we take capital costs, warehousing costs, distribution costs, obsolescence costs, insurance, and build those into models that help publishers really understand what they're purchasing, as opposed to getting the lowest print quote by comparing Kathleen's quote to my quote to Brad's quote to any other number of quotes that some production department could get. So it's a different way of looking at the business, and that's evolved over the years as the channels become more demanding.
So I'm curious, if obviously you got to take into account all of those things to really get a total life cycle cost of that book. What have you seen with your customers in terms of keeping consistency across a book from first print and forward? So, you might have somebody who says, okay, I can really see that I know I'm going to sell 10,000 initially, or I'm going to do 10,000 this run, so it makes the most sense from a cost perspective to be offset. But then who knows what's going to happen down the line, so I want to be able to do short run or POD. But I know that my options are now different, right? Because the first one was offset, second one's digital. now maybe I'm changing paper stocks, maybe I have to change my finishing or cover materials or whatever just because of the way that things line up. Are you seeing that publishers are more concerned about keeping consistency or about cost, or is it depends on the project? Anybody want to take that one?
Well, for our publishing customers, what they've done is consolidated their materials so that they have a consistent paper all across the board, so they don't have to vary it when they go from one mode to another. And I think that they also choose their print partners based on what quality they need for that particular niche or genre, so that our customers are kind of limiting what they're doing themselves so that they don't get the variations if they have a lot of choices.
Brad or Mike, are you seeing any?
Yeah, I think some of the inconsistencies may come in too with the number of print providers that you're utilizing. Print to order and short-run digital are typically done on the same type of equipment, so there's not a lot of inconsistency from a single provider across those manufacturing methods. But as you go to offset, there will be some inconsistencies between just the technologies themselves. But how perceptible are those inconsistencies to who's buying that book, I think is very important to understand as well. If it's a minor inconsistency from offset to toner or to inkjet, how impactful is that on the sales of that title, I think is something to consider.
True.
I guess, the technologies and the development of technologies, you've got some of the world's largest technology firms supporting us as manufacturers. The HPs, the Canons, the Muellers. There's huge capital, great R&D and technology that have really advanced the quality of books over the last couple of decades, especially in digital and digital inkjet, where it used to be a compromise to have to do a book of one. Now a book of one can look as high quality as a book of 10,000 because the technologies are there and your partners in this room have invested in those. And I encourage you, especially in the print and the binding sessions later today, challenge the experts and get them to tell you how a book of one can be not only a high quality but an economical book. You don't have to give up all the qualities that you may have 10 years ago in binding short run or producing short run books. There are always these trade-offs, so the less standard you are, the more expensive you're going to be, and I think that's the biggest thing that you see in some of the models in the world that are in book distribution often limit the paper choices or the binding choices to get high throughput grouping and production like that. So there's no question, but that actually is the same in long run offset. If you want to do gilt-edged Bibles, that's generally a little more expensive than doing a 6x9 paperback book. So, but the real advancement in technologies is global companies have put technologies to work for book manufacturers that allow us to produce great high quality books at reasonable costs for publishers. That really wasn't the case 10 years ago and certainly not 20 years ago.
So Mike, you kind of mentioned obviously the differences between a Gilded Edge book versus your standard 6x9 paperback, and we looking here at this slide just in terms of, you have the typical long tail graph, and you may have your super bestsellers and the ones that are gonna sell 200,000 copies off the bat, and then the more niche players who know they're maybe not going to sell 50,000 of something, but they really want to really make the book an object for that person and make an experience. Maybe Gilded Edges are really what that's called for. How have the technologies changed to be able to help get enough efficiencies and enough economies of scale that maybe they're not going to go bankrupt trying to make this really cool book or make the book even affordable to purchase?
I think if you look at the slide, the content titles where it shows the long declining, the long tail in the green titles, I think all of us, we certainly have customers who put a lot of put tens of thousands, if not more, money into author acquisition, into editorial, into production and development. And then as soon as they launch that first title, the book goes straight into either POD or into micro inventories. It's never produced in that blue sector because their target market is very narrow. They often sell, many of these are educational or professional publishers that have very narrow, very small niche markets, but they don't ever put that book into a warehouse and run it through. They put all the money in the development, and then they find the right technology, the right book manufacturing partner to get their book to market. Sometimes that's just on demand, and every time they get an order and a book is produced and sold. But it doesn't mean that the book is not viable. They find the right technology partner, and they understand their market. And in this long tail, it talks about blockbusters in a niche. Maybe the blockbuster title only sells 500 books, but they're selling for $500 a book. So it's a pretty nice P&L curve, or it's serving a really narrow niche that's important. And the book manufacturers, not all companies have the capabilities of doing the shorthead, as it says on the long tail there. The blockbusters, the top 40, are running it through. All of us see and hear about those amazing titles, whether it's the Grishams of years ago or whatever, that create havoc in our industry sometimes. But your choice of book manufacturing partners, sometimes they only operate in that blue band, and sometimes they only operate in the green band. Your business, I know I talked to a number of people at the trade show last night. A number of people just go right into online and let other people manage the manufacturing, warehouse, and distribution, which maybe that's the right thing because their leverage is really not in managing their production costs. But many traditional publishers that have tens or hundreds of titles, you really want to make sure you know where your product is going and then choose your manufacturing partner appropriately.
Brad or Kathleen, anything more on that?
No, I think also an important factor is understanding once it's in that narrow band and kind of moves into the long tail of that, how do you support that and keep that in programs that keeps that print happening, keeps you realizing those sales as it kind of moves over into that end of life cycle and maintaining that viability of that title. I think that's huge to realize more sales.
Okay. Shifting over, I know, Mike, this is something you guys have used in the past when you talk about, putting all those costs into a model and really looking at ownership. Do you want to kind of run through, through that a little bit?
So when I started in the book business, which was almost 4 decades ago, we used to get a quote with specifications and a price, and we'd give it to our production contacts. They'd compare it to my friends' quotes and make a choice and move forward. As I said, we've tried to evolve, and certainly not all of our publishers are partnered this way, but a number of our publishers, where we look at their list and we try to help them understand what's the cost of a book sold, not what's the cost of a book that they purchase from our company or any company in the room. So we try to look and help them work, and I guess if you're in book production and stuck in whatever floor you're on in the tower here in New York and trying to make your mark, it must be frustrating at times to just be managing that one part and knowing that what you do has impact on the warehouse, on the distribution, on the marketing and sales, but not really being involved in some of those discussions or collaborating either within your company or with your print partners. And some people have made their mark by bridging and pushing out of production manufacturing departments and working with their finance, marketing, or editorials to really come up with different models that help their company overall become more successful. We had a publisher that took their average order quantity. They had trouble, as Matt's model a few slides ago said, are we going to sell 1,000 or 5,000 or whatever? They took their average order quantity on some niche lines from, say, about 1,000 books down to 500, and we helped them analyze what was the impact of that on their warehousing costs, on their obsolescence, on their other costs of capital. And they wanted to free up capital for author acquisition or to invest in marketing, to promote the sales of the books, or to invest in their people, as opposed to putting their capital into a warehouse and into books that were sitting there sometimes for 18, 24 months, and then sometimes, regrettably, 4 or 5 years later when the accountants finally said they had to write off the remaining inventories. So looking at the total costs, many of the companies in North America will step back and work with you on your publishing list and say, okay, this is your ordering cadence or your methodology. And if you change your methodology, either by product line or new titles, reprints, or running it through, you can free up a lot of free capital to reinvest in different areas, look at those other costs, and it's more than just your manufacturing costs. Certainly, getting the manufacturing costs to the right levels, using the standard papers or things that'll help you get those economics down is important, but not having 30% of your books left over in 24 months is way, what's that impact? That's like 30% difference on the unit price that you could have bought if you did it right in the first place. So can you get 30% off of your current vendor, or can you get 30% in other areas? And especially in dynamic changing markets where online sales can create a blockbuster and you have to have a responsive partner that can get you that product through, or not overstocking. All those things come into what helps create a profitable, successful publisher. And I think for all our companies, when you look at digital inkjet printing, the price curve is pretty flat. It's not like offset production where 5,000 copies is 25% more than 15,000 copies or something. 500 copies is not much less than 750 copies or 1,000 copies. One of our publishers we looked at taking, I think it was an average order quantity of 800 down to under 600. The average unit cost changed 2.5%, but their order quantities went down 40%. So they reduced their risk and exposure by 40%. They did incur a 2.5% per unit cost on manufacturing, but they were able to free up cash, reduce their risk, and when they looked at the total P&L with their finance team, their manufacturing team, it made a lot of sense for them to do that. And many of our costs, because we are there's not a lot of make-readies, not a lot of fixed costs in the production technologies that Bookmasters or PG or us or other manufacturers use, you can get much flatter costs. It's not the same as having to commit 10,000 copies to get the unit price down.
So
to create a
Kathleen,
P&L.
have you guys seen any, have you had to have difficult conversations with your customers about what Mike's referencing in terms of changing their thought process with regards to quantities and total costs and looking at the bigger picture? Or do you find that most people tend to just be, how much is that book?
No, I think our end of the spectrum is different because we do a book of one, and we also direct fulfill. So that book is coming from the publisher and is getting manufactured and shipped direct to the end user. So the cost model is, totally different, and there's very little waste.
Right.
It's more responsibly produced. So from our perspective in our world, we're just trying to get that book to the end user in the most efficient way possible. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Brad, have you seen any pushback in terms of ways to look at total cost versus per unit cost?
Yeah, I think we try and work with publishers to understand that total unit cost. As a distribution and fulfillment partner for publishers, we're looking at the inventory there on hand, looking at the obsolescence rates of those things, and trying to work with those publishers to maximize what that inventory is and what the correct programs are to get into across the board. So, yeah.
Okay. All right, these are just a couple other questions that we talked about prior. And I think we've addressed some of these, but when we're flipping models, right? We've talked about the offset versus POD and short run, and we talk about you get differences obviously in costs and an inkjet and the digital side. Like Mike, you said, there's not a huge difference going from 500 to 700 when that, but you can get a lot of cost savings in offset when you jump quantities because of the economies of scale there. Do things like the different embellishments, whether that be trim sizes or you want to add ribbons or any of that, how does that all of a sudden kind of become an issue with regards to the various technologies using on the print side. Anybody want to stab at that one first?
Yeah, I think it's important to look at, some of the print-on-demand providers have very pocketed, kind of very small inside the box. So looking at, does your partner support what this title would be for offset printing or for short-run digital or for print-on-demand? Is that trim size variability there? Do I have to reformat this product for one of those manufacturing methods? Do I have to take off varnishes or spot glosses or die cutting or any of that sort of stuff? So working with them to understand, supporting that title through its life cycle, and how do some of those manufacturing specifications change just a little bit. And I think the gap's narrowing between what's achievable offset historically and what you can do digitally as well. So talking to them and understand what are their specific capabilities and how do their programs support your list and your titles. I think it's very important to have those conversations and understand that.
I agree with you. I think that over the past 24 years, we've seen huge changes in what short run and POD can do. There's still, things to come, but we have come so far. Initially it was just a soft cover book, right?
Tape bound, yeah.
Tape bound, yeah. That's going back a ways.
Yeah, sorry.
But print providers are doing French folds on soft covers in POD. You have, a case-bound book can have head and foot bands, a printed case wrap, and it's not going to look any different than a book that was produced in the traditional manner. So I think we've come a long way in what we have to offer.
Okay. Just as we're getting close to wrapping up here, as you know, we're going to hear pre-press, paper finishing, fulfillment, all those things coming up later today. Are there anything else that people should be thinking about that's going to help them with their manufacturing relationships to ensure success in their projects? Anything else you want to hit on?
The biggest thing that comes to my mind for a publisher to benefit from POD is the automated workflows and the automated processes and the files, and how you're going to communicate with that print provider, and how are you going to automate so that everything that comes along with producing a book is done automatically. And I hopefully in this session that'll be talked about.
Yeah, the one thing I don't think we talk much about that impacts costs is the turnarounds. And Brad mentioned the SLAs and the penalties from online channels, but the ability for a manufacturer to take some of the publishers I spoke to last night, small orders, and group those with some of the largest publishers in the world in similar product designs allows us to pass on and share some fixed costs. When turnaround times become narrow, it limits our capability to be flexible with multiple production processes and running it through. So turnaround times and the ever-decreasing amount of time that manufacturing gets out of the overall cycle puts a lot of cost pressure on us to either standardize the product so you only get 4 types of papers and X number of sizes, and French flaps and embellishments and ribbons and stuff are all outside that normal SLA. But if the cycle times are not as demanding or not tied into some of those channels, that does allow a manufacturer to group work across a number of publishers, which is the way we all build our businesses, and allow us to share economic savings for you as long as those products fit our capabilities, which they do change amongst different BMI members.
Yeah, I think it's also important to make sure that your print provider understands you as a publisher and your list and what you're trying to achieve, and you're not necessarily lost in the machine of just taking an order and filling an order and using one method. If they understand, what your sales velocity is, what your goal is for a specific title or for your list, and they're working proactively with you to find these right manufacturing methods, to find the right gap programs, to find the right programs to get you involved. And I think that's very important to long-term success of not just necessarily being a number in a program, but that print provider understanding you as a customer and understanding what you're trying to achieve.
With all the technology changes, and you'll hear some of this afternoon, like things that we didn't think were possible that are automated or integrated with cover finishes or or bindings, the same thing. Manufacturers need to hear from you and your editorial, because it's always hard as a production manufacturing group to go back to the marketing and editorial and say, no, we can't do that, no, we can't do that. So we need to be responsive and open and take it to our technology partners and say, no, we need ribbons with French flaps with raised UV on top of glitter something or other, right? So, so it's a two-way street, and that's where all of us would prefer to work as partners that are really intimate with what your publishing program is trying to achieve, as Brad said, so that we can be responsive with our manufacturing partners and make the right investments to help you succeed and differentiate your products in your market space.
And as a father of 3, I don't want any glitter near any children's book.
No glitter? No.
All right, well, we've got a couple minutes for some questions from the audience. If anybody has any questions they'd like to fire this way. We do have a mic and running around. Speak now. Yes, Don.
Down here we go.
Over the years, there's been issues with regards to paper availability, and then with the change in the manufacturing side, printers being consolidated, printers closing up, printers opening up, technology changing from printers going from offset to digital. A lot of discussion is still lacking on the scheduling side with regards to paper availability, then the press availability or digital equipment availability, and then bindery. Because when I was on the publishing side, my run lengths were 100,000 to 200,000 a title. So I always had printers saying, "Oh, I could do your work," until they got my work, and then it was like, "I can give you 5,000." I know I need 100,000. But then they'd always say the paper, we're waiting on paper, and then we're waiting to get it on press, then we're waiting to get it bindery. So what's the panel's take on, because the world hasn't changed with regards to supply and demand of paper, supply and demand of manufacturing capabilities. So yes, manufacturing has changed with regards to the digital side. You can get stuff done quicker, faster, but you're still dealing with getting paper in, getting time, and then getting it out the door.
So if you guys don't mind, I know we're going to talk. We have a whole session later today specifically on paper. So I'll let those folks address the availability question, but can you guys address that in terms of the timing and scheduling and looking at the overall thing from paper to print to finishing? How is that changing these days?
Go ahead.
I think all these programs that we're talking about kind of help to support some of those gaps in availability. If it's enrolled in PTO, maybe if there's an inventory gap, you can kind of fill it with PTO until paper would become available. I think most printers are going to have a good idea of when that paper is going to be available based on the order quantity that's coming in and knowing their partners and knowing their merchants and when paper is available, or any other piece of manufacturing component. But enrolling in some of these programs can help protect and protect sales during that time as well. If you're moving it from offset of 100,000 copies and you can only get 5,000, but I need 500 more the next day, PTO gap protection can kind of help there. But I think most manufacturers are going to be able to predict that pretty consistently.
In short run and print on demand, we haven't had any issues with getting paper. Most of our customers we have SLAs with so that we know the turn times and know when the product has to get out the door. So I don't see any issues with that.
But I think it still comes down to if you treat your book manufacturing partners as real partners, then you don't wait till you have your file to issue a PO to say I need the books in 2 weeks or 2 days or whatever. So it's getting your manufacturing group involved with the planning and making sure that you're having those communications proactively with your manufacturers so that you are protected, because even for a publisher, 10,000 books could be a huge order, or 100,000 books is always a huge order, and running it through. But the more communication, the more proactive you are at looking at things within your company and then getting that out to your print partners, we can work with the supply chain and make sure that you're protected as much as we can. Many of us realize blockbusters that come out of the blue, you can't plan and project those, and we need to have partners that are responsive and flexible for those amazing blockbusters, because those sales don't exist a month later if the books aren't on the shelves.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and hopefully, if you were, you would have found some new partners upstairs yesterday. Awesome. All right. Well, I appreciate everyone. Thank you, panel, for your time. Hopefully, it was great. We're going to call up our next